Hello and welcome to the Blockchain Blueprint. And today I am joined by Anton from Humanic, and he is the CTO there. Now, before I get into it, I should say that I was at a blockchain conference just last week in London. And when I heard this guy talk about Humanic, and I've known about them for some time, he spoke about sustainability in a way that I never really heard in blockchain before. And I thought we had to get him on. So we rushed everything and within a week sorted this interview out. So thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
Yeah, absolutely. So to give people a brief intro as to what you do exactly, you are the CTO of Humanic, as we've mentioned, and you've had experience with BMO Financial Group while implementing Apple Pay and Android Pay. And you've also worked on BMO MasterCard, Overdraft, and check image capturing projects. In 2015, you also founded Finlit, a startup which was algorithmic installment and revolving credits. And according to Humanic's website, when I looked upon it, they are the first mobile service with the capacity to change the world. A bold claim, but they are a new generation of financial services with its own cryptocurrency, which is aimed at eradicating poverty amongst millions of people living in the emerging economies. I feel it's a really important thing to bring up because we've not really touched upon the importance of sustainability or charity or giving back. So I'm sure it's something our viewers and our students will really want to grasp if they want to follow in your footsteps. So without further ado, can you tell us a bit more about yourself, Anton, for us?
Sure. So just as you've mentioned, I did start my career at BMO, but originally I was born in Ukraine. So at the age of 15, I started. So I moved to Canada. I started studying at one of the colleges out there. Then I even finished, so I graduated earlier. So I did my credits faster because I always had this feeling that there's not enough time. There's not enough time in your life to do everything you've planned, everything you've wanted. So that's pretty much how, with that perception, I started working at BMO. And as you've mentioned, I've been working in multiple internal, external projects out there. It was the perfect time to get into the sense of the blockchain area, because in 2014 it was just starting to get a bit wider sense in the audience. So it stopped being something within the closed group of really I would say the most interesting people that I've never ever met out there. But it's also been expanding to the larger audiences. And it's also been the inception of the Ethereum, which I got myself really deep into. So as you mentioned, again, in 2015, I started my own startup, and then we were doing preventative credit scoring. So at that time, it was a very efficient way to lower down the cost of user acquisition for the banks. So after I exited from the project, I was looking for more opportunities. So I was looking for more, I would say, for the next step in my life. So what would I do next? And I was looking for something, an idea, either a co-founder, that I would be able to actually make an impact. So at that time, I've met Alex Fork. So he's the founder of the project. And at that time, he was doing his social experiment in the suburban areas of Ashgabat, India. So that was the very first time that I've heard about the perception of Humanic and then the idea of Humanic. And well, ever since then, obviously, we started working together. So it's been almost like a bit more than actually 2 years that the project has been alive out there. And it has made a tremendous, I would say, impact, not only from, simple metrics perspective, because for the year that the platform itself was live, we've been able to accumulate more than 500,000 people in emerging markets using the service, and then more than 340,000 of those using the services on a monthly basis. But it's been also the entire idea of what is the financial marketplace, or what is the bank, but no bank in a regular or original sense. So typically, Humanic's the only and the one mission was to drive the economy forward using local resources. So pretty much through the entrepreneurship. So basically the perception was, well, how not to be an NGO and not to give out the money just for the sake of giving out money for free, but then how to bring the tools and resources to people to be able to drive the economy further. And with that, just one basic perception, we've been trying a lot of different concepts, approaches, and that's why we have different divisions in terms of how everything is working. And as we've met last week at the Hard Fork, I was actually speaking about one of our subdivisions, the charity wing, where we introduced a platform which allows to make more transparent and a more controllable charity donations. That entire thing evolves around one simple concept, again, just how to make sure that local entrepreneurs have all of the tools necessary to actually build a sustainable project and business in their own countries. And that's ultimately everything we do.
Okay. You've touched on this quite a lot anyway, but I suppose it wouldn't have to ask, but what's the business model of Humanic? What's its objectives?
Sure. So in terms of the business model, I'll zoom out here and then come back to the question. It's somehow, while we've been observing the market, it seems to be that there's no company in the world right now that would be self-sustainable. So in terms of, again, profitability, that would be truly focused on social good only. So that's a bold statement, that's a bold mission. And for us, the profit generation model is based on the revenue split. So one of the internal projects and products, that's a more correct way to say, that we have is the local marketplace. So that's where businesses are allowed to pretty much showcase and then show their businesses. So whether it is services, goods, actions, so you name it, you can name it the freelance platform for everything. And then we allow other people, obviously, to find and search for the businesses and serve as an escrow there. So that's the main driver for the profit generation out there, and that's pretty much the only time or the only place where Humanic charges the consumers, and that's pretty much the only time we charge the consumers whenever there has been the business deal that was done between the business and the user, and then we served an escrow, so we served as a safe. I would say as a safe. You can call it a middleman between, again, the user and the business, just to start that safe relationship. And that's what drives, again, the business out there. So all of the other services, all of the other activities out there on the platform, it is all free for the end consumer.
Tell us about the project work of sustainability you've been involved with, such as some example case studies. Last week in your talk, you mentioned quite a lot about this. So for those who weren't there, which is going to be pretty much everyone watching this, could you tell us more about that?
Sure. So for instance, I'm going to talk about one of the latest pilots that we did for the charity product out there. So it was with the US non-for-profit entity called Be Gifted. So it's quite a small charity organization which are focused on providing, I would say, more equal education for kids in Sierra Leone, so Africa. And our main target for the pilot out there was to make sure that how can we actually help the Be Gifted to raise more funds, to actually track and then transfer the funds that they've raised more carefully and then with less, I would say, commission rates to the final destination, which is obviously the local office of Be Gifted in Sierra Leone and then their country agents. So obviously teachers, schools, students, and then how to make sure that the project outcome can actually be quantifiable. So you can actually track, well, how many students were involved in the program? What was the initial achievable of the program? What's the outcome of the programs in terms of how many people or how many kids received an educational course? What's the outcome? So ultimately the basic idea was to try to track, well, how did their life change? So in terms of why I call it a pilot project, because for the charity wing that we have out there, we're still in the testing mode out there. So that's why we try to perform small pilot projects, which could be no more than 2 weeks long. So that involves the entire fundraising campaign, transferring the funds, so entire settlement transactions, and obviously the execution of the program. to make sure that we can see quick results so that we can actually track and then monitor and then obviously iterate as fast as possible. So that was one of the latest projects. Just to give you a quick overview of the facts. So initially, Be Gifted Foundation, they were planning to raise $1,500 US. We were able to raise a bit more than 4,500. So there was an increase in the fundraising by 306%. How? By providing more fundraising methods, which are trackable, which are verifiable, more transparent. So with the crypto, what happens is that obviously the terms of the fundraising campaign were pretty clear. So if the company would not be able to perform what they've claimed to do so, all of the funds would be returned to the donators. Ultimately, what happened is that the very first time in the history of Be Gifted Foundation, they were able to track the entire what I call it the supply chain of how the funds were moving. So from the donors to their account, from their account to their local, obviously foundation, and then moving to counter agents. So every step was verifiable and then open to the donators. And then ultimately is that we were able to achieve the funds at a much lower commission rate. So typically, just to give you an overview, especially specifically, or better to say, if we're talking about fundraising mechanisms in Africa, the commission rates for simply transferring, so doing the settlement transaction could be from like 20% to 80% of the entire transaction. So ultimately what it means is that if you are a donator, so if you want to give out the money for charity, for every dollar you donate, it would be only cents. So ultimately, I'm not joking, I'm not over exaggerating, it's literally cents that would be delivered to the final recipient. So if you're saying that if you donated $10 to the kids in Sierra Leone, it would be only a couple of cents that the kids would actually receive out there finally. And that's just because of the complex structure of how the entire charity sector works. So ultimately, we're not trying to change anything here. We're only trying to change the inefficiencies. And then the inefficiencies are literally in the organizational structure of the charities, in the entire bunch of settlement and then middlemen out there. And then ultimately, no transparency, which involves a lot of corruption at the end stages. So obviously, when the funds are actually finally being distributed, when anything quantifiable that you're trying to give out to people would be giving out. So in terms of the results here, is what we've calculated is that the end commission rate for this project, the specific Be Gifted Foundation project, the project name was Teddy Bear. That's our code name. It was a bit more than 6%, which could be rounded up to 6%. So 6%, we wouldn't have the exact number to compare with this specific project because every campaign is very different, especially for Be Gifted. But again, comparing to the typical numbers, which have claimed again is from 20% up to like 80, 90%. Even if we take the lower mark of it, which is 20%, it's still a significant drop. So from 20% to 6%. So ultimately, what we've been exploring is that with the blockchain technology, we are able again to pretty much streamline the processes that in the niches that we take and perceive. What it means is that this entire idea of the charity wing was ultimately the outcome of the general platform that we have. So what we said is, well, what if we just do this, this, and that, and then try it here? And that's pretty much the results that we already see here. The general Humanic platform is still working, is still growing or operational. It has a more general meaning in terms of it's open in 46 countries. So 46 countries out of those 28 countries are in Africa. The remaining ones are in Latin America and South Asia Pacific. But again, it just happened to be so that we still target more in African market. There are two reasons for that. Just touching very briefly. It happened to be so that the epicenter of the unbanked population, and then unbanked is still a very vague term. What literally means is that people who don't have access to the global economy, it means that they just simply don't have access to either receive funds from somewhere else on the planet or just to send out the funds out to somewhere on the planet. And there are many reasons for that, one of which is the lack of identity, so government issued identity. piece out there. And then the second reason is that obviously the traction that we received as a startup was much bigger in Africa. So that's why we focused more of our efforts on African market out there.
Hmm. You've mentioned that there's a lot of Latin American, Africa, and Asian countries. Is it mainly for people in the third world? Because there are also people who are less fortunate, who live in poverty and squalor in the so-called Western or first world even. So do you look to help people there as well?
Ultimately, yes, there should be no barriers in terms of the nationality, in terms of the actual physical, what I call geolocation. However, the only hurdle that we have is that the legal framework that we have to operate within. That is why, obviously, to make sure that our platform is fully legal and it is available, so it is white label, we have to perform and then we have to stay in line with local regulatory perspective, which puts a lot of the limitations, especially in the US, which is why we're not, which is why the full platform is not available in the US market, and it's a subject then to limitations depending on specific country. So I would say is that that's definitely the final, I would say, ultimate true mission, just to be available truly globally with no limitations. But we still have to somehow, I would say, fight with the local regulatory rules that we have to be compliant with.
Again, you've touched upon this a little bit, but how does humanity aim and intend to eradicate poverty exactly?
The poverty itself is a very complex term, and there are a lot of, I would say there are just way too many strategies or way too many theories as to why it exists in the first place and as to how to eliminate it. But as we look into the things, it exists as a fact, and neither the World Bank, the United Nations, the UNICEF, or even the local governments were able to fight this issue. As you mentioned, even the what's so-called the first world countries, even in the US, there's still the small percent of the people that are living, I would say, under the limit of the poverty. That is why the entire concept has to be changed. So we believe in order to fight this issue, things have to take a different angle. So they have to be taken from a different perspective. And the perspective that we're looking into it is that we want people to be able actually to, let's put it this way, not to fight for themselves, but to be able to actually make sure that they can have a better life through, again, financial empowerment. What it means is that, in simple words, we want to make sure that people have all the tools they can to actually do the business. So in order to become the entrepreneurship. So we believe that's one of the most efficient ways to actually try to eliminate the poverty. We're not trying to create equal, what's so-called the equal market rules for everybody, but we want to make sure that everybody has the same set of tools. So if we're talking about the remote jobs opportunities, if we're talking about the remote capital access, equal opportunities, that's what we're fighting for. It means that the person in Tanzania, in Ghana, in Sierra Leone should be able to actually perform the business on a global scale, just like anybody else around the world. So that literally depends on the business model, but ultimately the tools that we are providing and the simple pain that we're solving for the customers that we have is that we provide them an ability to pay and get paid online. And with that simple problem solution, then it scales to many different things. So once you're actually being able to get paid online through like pretty much any point or any point of the location in the world, now that's when you can actually interact with many other, again, contra agents. That's when you can find the clients, or that's when you can actually try to do the remote jobs. So for instance, one of the biggest, I would say, opportunities that we've seen is there's an entire, I would say, stream that's called Mechanical Turk. So that's an Amazon service, and then what it allows people pretty much to perform micro jobs. So things like verifying an object, so doing proofreading, or doing something, verifying an object or identifying an object. So whatever, if it's a dog or a cat on an image. So something that is later used by the machines, but it still requires manual human job or input. And that those kind of opportunities, they're pretty much, they're open and should be open to any person in the world. So literally anybody could perform that simple task, to differentiate, obviously, whether there's a dog or whether there's a cat on image, but that job is paid. So that entire simple opportunity to receive that pay, that already opens a lot of opportunities for different people. So pretty much what we're saying is that, well, if we allow the SMEs, so small, medium, or enterprises, but mostly, obviously, we're talking about small and medium businesses out there, to get access to that external capital, that's when things can actually start moving faster and then start moving into the right direction. It's still too soon to say how far we've gone into this, so how many people we've affected, or whether we've affected enough number of people to actually see a clear differences in the micro or at least macro economic state. But we truly believe that we're in the right direction, and then the more people obviously will on board, and then the more people get that opportunity, the sooner the results would be clearly visible in order to show, well, that's how our truly things are changing.
You've mentioned the potential opportunities that there are for playing on an equal playing field. So I want to talk about the opportunities that blockchain, as well as working in sustainability, can bring about, and how the two can work together, not just for a company such as yourself, but anyone who aspires to be the next Humanic or anyone else.
Sure. I would again zoom out here and say, so if we would look into the computational costs, so obviously in the last like 40, 50 years, the computational costs decreased by at least 100 times, maybe more. If we would look into the labor price, that increased at least 2 to 10 times, depending on the vertical. So what the technology is doing here is that it's not only replacing the irrelevant human labor, but it's providing the opportunities for more relevant human labor. And then what I mean by that, it means that everything, if we're looking for the product perspective, comes from a very simple mission. You have to solve and resolve your client's pain. For Humanic itself, we chose that our pain is the poverty. So then everything around the technology was formed into, well, how do we fight the poverty? So how do we fight the financial empowerment? There are many, those general terms out there. But ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that the technology is only the utility piece out here. So the technology itself, or even the blockchain, as we're going to get into it, is only a utility tool. So you have to define how that technology can solve that pain, that specific pain that you chose. And then the pain could be, again, as big as, for example, we chose, right, the poverty, which is a which is one of the worst pains of humanity throughout the entire history, which could be up to a very small, specific niche pain. So for instance, again, I'm just making up the examples right now, but well, it's too hard for me to find my keys from the car. So well, we have the tile solution, right, which helps you find the keys if you lost them. So see what I mean is that the technology here is specifically applied to resolving the pain. So if we now get back to specifically blockchain, now blockchain allows to create us very, very different business models. As to why? Because it eliminates the need of this human-to-human trust interaction. Now, what it means is that if I would need a trusted resource to actually do something, now blockchain helps me to eliminate that need. It doesn't mean that it eliminates the human being involved into the process, but it means that it can help things move faster, more streamlined. And that's ultimately how we look into this technology, which is still a very, very new concept to a lot of the people that we're meeting. Just to give you an overview, at some point we've calculated that at least 73% of all of the users that we onboard into the platform, for them, it's the very first smartphone, right, that they're using in their life. So on top of the very first smartphone, I would say, I myself, I've been, again, accustomed to mobile phones for at least 10 years out there. And I've experienced from, again, the simple button phones to the very first iPhone, and then as to how the industry changed out from there. For the majority of the customers that we have, it would be the very first smartphone that they would ever touch, that they ever work with. So that on top of that, that already creates a lot of different what we call, again, work processes or work patterns or usage patterns. So that creates, again, new routes. And understanding even the blockchain concept out here in terms of, well, how they've been doing businesses the entire life and then how it's changing now, that's really frustrating. So the blockchain is just simply pretty much, again, turning, it's a life turning point. So from how things been done before to how things are being done now. And then ultimately it's just the right utility use. So you choose the pain and then you identify the solutions, whether that's applicable or not, whether you can do something or not. If you can do it, well, how do you create the technology that allows us to do that?
What advice can you give to someone who wants to work in blockchain, is watching this video right now and is thinking to himself, I want to do something for the world and give back and work within sustainability or a nonprofit, and I want to use blockchain in my business? What words would you pass on to them?
That's a very good question. I would pass like two ideas here. Number one is clearly segregate the blockchain from the cryptocurrencies. Those are not the identical things. Those are not the things that always go in line. So in here, separate those two things. That's one. The number two is that if you really want to make an impact in the world, which is a very pure willing out there, I would say is to see where exactly you can apply your knowledge or your will or your your eager. And then what I mean is that you can make impact in the world in infinite number of ways. In order to be efficient in doing something, you have to be very specific in terms of what exactly you want to be doing. So what it means is that literally choose and pick something that you feel related to, something that you feel attached to. So pick one problem. Once again, it could be from very big problems to very tiny problems. It doesn't matter. So pick one and then start from there. That's very important, because without actually, without focusing your resources, you wouldn't be able to achieve any specific results. And then as to the blockchain, now the blockchain, the only thing that allows you to is it allows you to experiment with many different business models that you can have. The blockchain itself as a technology doesn't solve any problems. It only solves the problems, well, if it's applied correctly. And once again, step one, you have to go back in terms of what kind of the problem that you're trying to solve. What we've seen in terms of the industry is that the blockchain industry is still very young. People are still experimenting in terms of what they can do and then what it should not be doing. And we've seen too many examples in terms of blockchain being applied to things where it's completely irrelevant, which is okay because the industry has to mature and people have to see clearly examples. Well, that was an efficient use case and that's not efficient. So my advice would be still look into the use case.
So to wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add that we may not have talked about that you'd like to?
That's a good one, because there's still, like, for me being in this industry for this many years, I would say that that's the pace of this, or the speed as to how this industry, and then in here we're specifically talking about the blockchain industry, is changing. It's the fastest one that I've seen out so far. So it means that the number of the changes that we are experiencing every single day are far more bigger than anybody or anywhere else. So my example, or my words would here be, is that just feel it, experience it. The world is literally changing as we speak. And then if you want to be a part of it, there are no excuses. There are no prerequisites in terms of how and where. It's just literally find what exactly you want to be doing in your life. Find exactly where you want to help, and then where exactly you want to change, or what exactly you want to change. And then you have no limitations whatsoever. That should be just my last words out here.
Fantastic. And if people want to reach out to you or get in touch, what's the best way of doing so?
One of the best ways is that just reaching out to humanic.com. From there, they can find, again, many contacts. In terms of specifically reaching out to me, it's very simple. So Anton at humanic.com. So I'm always there. Happy to, again, speak, talk. If there's anything that you would like to share your thoughts or any question that you might have, I'd be happy to help out.
Anton from Humanic, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, EC, for having me. It's a pleasure, and it was a pleasure meeting you in the Hard Fork. That was a very, very good coincident, meetups out there.
Likewise, likewise. And yeah, speak to you soon.
Thank you very much. Speak soon.